嗨，大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。有一种香气，你走在街上，就算闭着眼睛也能认出它。那是花椒在热油里爆开的瞬间，那是豆瓣酱慢慢炒出红油的气味，那是一整口锅的锅气冲上天花板的感觉。台湾人管那条巷子叫川菜街，就在台北西门町附近，成都路旁边的小巷。那里曾经飘着这样的香气几十年。今天的主角就从那条巷子说起。一个人叫做邓记，人们称他为台湾川菜之父；另一个人叫做韩婷婷，他是下一个时代的传承者。他把老一辈的川菜灵魂翻译成了现代人能理解的语言。这两个人合在一起，构成了台湾饮食史上一段最动人的文化现象。好，我们先从头说起。1949年，台湾的天空底下发生了一件大事，数十万人从中国大陆渡海而来，他们带来的不只是身份和记忆，他们带来了整个饮食宇宙。江苏人带来了他们的甜，广东人带来了他们的鲜，湖南人带来了他们的辣，四川人带来了他们的麻。那是台湾饮食史上一次前所未有的大融合，但融合不代表容易。融合是一个漫长的碰撞过程，川菜尤其困难，因为四川口味跟台湾原本的饮食习惯差距实在太大了。台湾的日常饮食偏向清淡，海鲜的鲜甜，蔬菜的爽脆，汤水的清明，而川菜是什么？重油、重麻、重辣、重香，那是一种完全不同频率的味觉语言。所以当第一批川菜师傅在台湾开始卖菜的时候，很多台湾人走进去闻了一下那个油烟味，摇摇头就走了。但邓记没有因为这样放弃，他做的事情非常聪明，也非常有远见。他说，好，台湾人现在不习惯，但他们会习惯的，只要我让他们先接受，再让他们慢慢爱上。这个思路放在今天来看，根本就是一个完整的市场策略，先降低门槛，建立熟悉感，再逐渐深化体验。邓记从最好入口的菜开始，宫保鸡丁、鱼香茄子，这两道菜的辣度比较温和，有酸有甜有香，台湾人比较能接受。他先用这些菜打开台湾人的门，等到台湾人说，哦，这个川菜好像还不错，他再慢慢把更复杂的味型带进来，麻辣水煮牛肉、夫妻肺片，那种真正让人舌头发麻的东西。这个策略走了多久？走了好几年。而在这个过程里面，他还解决了另一个巨大的问题，食材的问题。因为两岸当时无法通商，很多四川最关键的食材根本拿不到，比如说郫县豆瓣，那是川菜的灵魂调料。豆瓣酱里面那种特殊的发酵香气，是四川郫县那个地方的气候和土壤造就的，是不可复制的东西。但在台湾拿不到郫县豆瓣，怎么办？邓记用台湾的冈山豆瓣酱代替。冈山豆瓣和郫县豆瓣味道不一样，但已经是当时最接近的选项了。还有花椒，汉源花椒是四川最顶级的花椒，那种麻是一种清亮的麻，带着一点点柑橘香气。台湾的花椒没有那么细腻，但邓记还是想办法用现有的材料尽力还原那个感觉。然后还有一个特别有意思的细节，麻婆豆腐的肉，正宗四川的麻婆豆腐一定用牛肉末，那个牛肉末炒出来的油脂和香气，是猪肉末给不了的。但台湾早期有个文化，务农的人一般不吃牛肉，因为牛是农耕的伙伴，所以很多台湾人看到菜里有牛肉，心里有一点抗拒。邓记就把麻婆豆腐的牛肉末换成猪肉末。这个改动在老派川菜师傅眼里是妥协，但在市场眼里是智慧，因为你的目的是让台湾人爱上川菜。如果一个调整能让更多人踏进门来，那这个调整是值得的。这种在不失去灵魂的前提下因地制宜的能力，是邓记最让人佩服的地方。后来有美食作家这样评论，邓记做的是川菜在台湾的本土化工程，这本质上是一次味觉移民的完整实验，成功了，就奠定了一个菜系在异乡的根基，而那个根基 在接下来的几十年里，长成了一棵非常茂盛的树。70年代的台湾，川菜进入了黄金时期。西门町成都路一带的川菜馆，一家接着一家开，形成了所谓的川菜一条街。前园川菜、真川味、富华川菜，这些名字在那个年代如雷贯耳，一开就是几十年，有的甚至到今天还在。那个时代吃川菜是有一种气氛的。你去西门町逛街看电影，逛完了肚子饿了，往那条巷子一拐进去，找个位子坐下来，一桌子的川菜端上来，麻辣的香气把周围的空气都烧热了，大家吃得满头大汗，筷子停不下来。那个画面是很多台湾人童年或青春时期最深刻的饮食记忆之一。好，说到这里，我要介绍今天的第二位主角了，韩婷婷。她出生在70年代末，从小在川菜厨房边长大。她的爷爷那一辈的厨师，对她来说是神一样的存在。她说她记得第一次看到厨房全速运转的样子，大火 no aim 大铁锅，师傅的手在那个火光里头动，大勺子往锅里一扬，火苗唰地窜起来，几乎快烧到锅沿上方的灯。那个画面让她整个人愣在那里。她说她当下心里就想了一件事，她说这个东西我要。但进入厨房的路走得很不简单。她第一次正式进到厨房工作，师傅给她的任务不是炒菜，是包蒜头。包蒜头包了2个月，然后是切姜丝，然后是洗菜，然后是切配料，一个一个阶段慢慢来。你不能跳，你不能问说我什么时候可以炒菜。师傅不喜欢徒弟问这种问题。老派厨房的哲学是，你看到的东西是你的老师，师傅的手是你的教科书，你用眼睛记，用手感受，用舌头判断。你不需要人家告诉你答案，你自己去找答案。这种训练方式，用今天的眼光看可能觉得太慢了，太没效率了。但韩婷婷后来说，她非常感谢那2个月的包蒜头，因为那2个月让她明白了川菜最核心的哲学，就4个字，好菜不急。什么叫做好菜不急？你想想看，川菜里头的那些精华是怎么来的？郫县豆瓣将要在陶缸里发酵至少1年以上，花椒油要让花椒在温热的油里面慢慢释放出那个麻香，不能太急，太急就苦了。一锅好的红汤底要用猪大骨鸡架子熬上4-5个小时，不能偷懒，偷懒就没有那个醇厚。所有川菜里最动人的滋味，都藏在等待里面，都藏在不急里面。韩婷婷把这个道理记了一辈子。到了90年代，台湾的餐饮业迎来了一个很重要的转折，两岸交流开放了，真正的四川食材终于可以进来了。郫县豆瓣、汉源花椒、青花椒，那些以前只能用替代品的材料，现在可以用正宗的了。韩婷婷说，机会来了，她觉得是时候把真正的川菜味道带给台湾人了。但她面对的问题比邓记那一代还要复杂，因为90年代的台湾，粤菜已经席卷了整个餐饮市场，港式饮茶到处都是。广东师傅带来了精致的饮茶文化，鲍鱼翅膀燕窝上桌，清蒸海鲜的火候精准到毫厘。台湾人的口味被养得越来越精致了。在这个背景下，你再去推川菜，很多人直接摇头，说太油了，说太辣了，说太粗犷了，说上不了台面。韩婷婷听到这些话没有生气，她说，你说太粗，那我就让它细，但川菜的灵魂不能动。她做了一件在当时很多老派师傅不理解的事情，她开始钻研怎么让川菜精致化。首先是摆盘，传统川菜的摆盘很豪迈，一大盘往桌上一放，好吃，但谈不上美感。韩婷婷说，我们的菜也可以有美感。她开始研究怎么让夫妻肺片的牛肉切得薄如纸片，薄到几乎透光，铺在盘子上像一幅抽象画，淋上红油，撒上芝麻和花生碎，那个颜色层次看起来就像是一件艺术品。然后是服务语言，她说我们要让客人知道他吃进去的是什么，不只是好吃， 他要知道为什么好吃，好在哪里。他开始走到台前，跟客人说菜的故事。这道宫保鸡丁，很多人觉得就是辣鸡肉加花生，但其实这道菜的名字背后有一段历史。宫保2个字是清朝一位大臣丁宝桢的头衔。他在四川做官的时候，非常喜欢吃辣椒和花生。他的厨师为了取悦他，把鸡肉切成丁，配上甜辣椒和花生，加入醋和糖平衡酸甜，创出了这道菜。后来人们为了纪念丁宝桢的官职，就把这道菜叫做宫保鸡丁。客人听完眼睛就亮了，说原来每道菜背后都有故事。韩婷婷说对，川菜是有历史的，川菜是有文化的。你今天吃的这一口，跟几百年前的历史是连着的。这个改变看起来不大，但它带来的效果是巨大的，因为它让川菜从一个吃饱的选择，变成了一个有文化底蕴的体验。台北的美食圈开始流传韩婷婷的名字。老一辈的饕客说，他的菜有邓记的根，但有他自己的叶。年轻一代的食客说，去韩师傅那边吃饭，不只是吃饭，是上了一堂川菜文化课。这就是传承最动人的地方，根不能断，但枝叶要长。讲到这里我要停一下，说一个让我非常感动的故事。韩婷婷有一道菜叫做干高汤，这道菜几乎已经失传了。它是川菜南唐包席里面最高级的汤品之一。做法是把猪肝打成极细的泥，加入高汤调配之后，上笼蒸成像豆腐一样的质地。端上桌的时候，汤是完全透明的清汤，里面有一块像豆花一样的干糕，吃起来那个口感细腻到你没办法形容。韩婷婷说，她第一次做出这道菜的时候，自己尝了一口，沉默了很久。她说她在那一口里面尝到了几十年前厨房里的师傅，尝到了那个年代的整个气息。后来有一次，她把这道干高汤端给一位年纪很大的老饕客，那个老先生吃了一口，就停了下来，坐在那里不说话，好久好久。然后他说，我妈年轻的时候跟我说过，四川有一道汤叫干高汤，她说那是她这辈子吃过最细腻的东西，但她说在台湾再也找不到了。老先生说着说着，眼泪就流下来了。他说，今天在你这里，我找到了。我每次说到这个故事，心里都很不平静，因为那不只是一道菜，那是一个跨越了几十年和几千公里的连结，是一个妈妈对儿子说过的故事，是一段回不去的记忆，通过一碗汤重新回来了。这就是饮食文化的力量，这就是川菜传承最深层的意义。好，现在我要从更高的角度来分析这个现象。为什么说邓记和韩婷婷构成了一个文化现象，而不只是2个很厉害的厨师的故事？我觉得有3个层面。第一个层面，他们代表了移民饮食在台湾落地生根的完整实验。你想想看，战后来台的人带来了这么多不同的饮食传统，这些传统在台湾这片土地上要如何存活，是很大的问题。有些菜系消失了，有些菜系变形了，有些菜系找到了自己的节奏，在台湾长出了新的生命。川菜走的是最后那条路，邓记那一代完成了第一步，让川菜在台湾活下来。韩婷婷那一代完成了第2步，让川菜在台湾长大，变成台湾饮食文化不可缺少的一部分。第2个层面，他们让我们看到了师徒制餐饮文化的美丽和它的局限。老派厨房的师徒制是一种很珍贵的知识传递模式，它的密度非常高，它口传心授的深度是任何食谱书和厨艺学校都复制不了的。但师徒制也有它的天花板，技术倾向保密，太过个人化，很难规模化，很难被更多人接触到。韩婷婷的贡献就在于，她找到了一个方式，把老派技艺的精髓保留住，同时用现代的语言把它表达出来，让更多人可以认识川菜，让川菜的文化可以更广泛的流传。第3个层面，他们让我们理解了真正能长久存在的饮食文化， 靠的不只是好吃，靠的是好吃加上情感连结加上时代记忆。你想想看，为什么有些餐厅开了60-70年还在？为什么前园川菜开业到今天还有人去？不只是因为菜好吃，而是因为那个地方承载了太多人的记忆。你在那里吃的是爸爸第一次带你去的记忆，是高中跟同学课后冲去的记忆，是结婚周年夫妻特地去回味的记忆。这些情感是任何新开的餐厅都没办法复制的，这才是饮食文化最根本的力量。我再说一个关于川菜本身的事情，因为很多人对川菜有一个巨大的误解，大家都觉得川菜就是辣，但实际上川菜的味型一共有24种，这是中国所有菜系里面味型最丰富的，而在这24种味型里头，用到辣椒的只有大概1/3，另外2/3的川菜根本没有辣。比如说甜烧白，那是一道甜的菜，把肥猪肉和糯米做成的甜点心，完全没有辣。比如说开水白菜，那是一道汤菜，汤是完全透明的清汤，里面就一颗处理过的娃娃菜，听起来很简单，但那个清汤是用鸡肉、猪肉、鸭肉多种肉类扫出来的顶级高汤，工序繁复到难以想象，味道清鲜的让人惊讶，完全没有辣。还有蒜泥白肉，白切猪肉蘸蒜泥红油，红油有一点点辣，但整体滋味是清爽的。川菜真正的精髓是麻，不是辣。麻辣不是一回事，麻是花椒带来的，辣是辣椒带来的，两个东西可以搭配，也可以分开。很多人第一次吃到正宗的花椒麻味，会有点不知道怎么形容，那是一种很奇妙的感觉，你的嘴唇开始轻微发麻，然后舌头也跟着麻，但那个麻不是痛，是一种微微的酥麻，带着一点清凉，然后被那个麻包裹着的味道慢慢释放出来，这种体验是任何其他菜系都无法复制的，这就是川菜的独特语言。邓记让台湾人认识了这个语言，韩婷婷让台湾人爱上了这个语言，并且开始把它当成自己的一部分。今天的台湾川菜市场已经发展得非常多元了，有西门町老街那种传统江湖川菜，把回锅肉、鱼香、茄子、苍蝇头做得豪迈下饭，有精致川菜餐厅把宫廷川菜做得细腻优雅，有创意川菜把川味元素融合进现代料理，甚至有米其林星级的川菜餐厅出现在亚洲各地。这一切的发展都是站在邓记那一代人打下的基础上的，都是通过韩婷婷那一代人的桥接才走到今天的。最后我想说一件事，有一次有人问韩婷婷，师傅，川菜的灵魂是什么？他想了很久，说了一个答案。他说，川菜的灵魂是包容。他说，你看那24种味型，每一种都是完全不同的个性，麻辣是霸道的，鱼香是细腻的，宫保是灵活的，怪味是复杂的，甜香是温柔的，这24种性格都叫做川菜，都是川菜的一部分。你说哪一种才是真正的川菜？每一种都是。这种包容力，这种在复杂里面找到和谐的能力，就是川菜最伟大的地方。而邓记和韩婷婷这两个人，他们做的事情不就是这样的包容吗？邓记包容了台湾的口味，在保持灵魂的同时接受了现实的调整。韩婷婷包容了时代的变化，在保留传统的同时接受了现代的语言。这种包容让川菜在台湾这片土地上生根了，让川菜成为了台湾饮食文化不可缺少的一部分。一个味道可以跨越时代，可以跨越海峡，可以跨越所有的隔阂，让一口滚烫的川菜成为大家共同的记忆。这就是饮食文化的力量，这就是传承的意义。我是 Jenny， 谢谢你今天陪我一起走过这段美味的历史，我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. There is a certain fragrance you would recognize even with your eyes closed. The moment Sichuan peppercorns burst open in scorching oil. The deep red aroma of dubanjiang slowly releasing its essence. The thunderous wave of wok breath rolling toward the ceiling. Locals called that lane the Sichuan Cuisine Street. It sits tucked beside Chengdu Road, near Ximending in Taipei. For decades that alley carried this fragrance through the air. Today's story begins right there in that lane. One name is Deng Ji. People call him the father of Sichuan cuisine in Taiwan. The other name is Han Tingting. She is the inheritor of the next era. She took the soul that the older generation built and translated it into a language modern people could understand and love. Together these two people represent one of the most remarkable cultural phenomena in Taiwan's entire food history. Let us go back to the beginning. In 1949, something enormous happened beneath the skies of Taiwan. Hundreds of thousands of people crossed the Taiwan Strait from mainland China. They brought with them not just their identities and their memories. They brought an entire universe of culinary tradition. People from Jiangsu brought their sweetness. Cantonese people brought their freshness. Hunan people brought their chili fire. And Sichuan people brought their numbing peppercorn depth. It was an unprecedented fusion event in Taiwan's food history. But fusion does not mean easy. Fusion is a long process of collision and negotiation. Sichuan cuisine faced a particularly steep challenge. Because the Sichuan flavor vocabulary was so far from what Taiwanese people were used to, the everyday Taiwanese table leaned toward clean and light. The sweetness of fresh seafood. The crispness of stir-fried vegetables. The clarity of simple soups. And Sichuan food was something entirely different. Heavy oil. Numbing peppercorn. Bold spice. Layered fragrance. A completely different frequency of taste. So when the first Sichuan chefs opened their doors in Taiwan, many Taiwanese people walked in, caught the scent of that thick cooking smoke, and quietly turned around. But Deng Ji did not give up. He did something very intelligent. And very farsighted. He said, Taiwanese people are not ready for this yet. But they will be. I just need to help them take the first step. Then let them fall in love at their own pace. Put into modern language. This is a complete market entry strategy. Lower the threshold first. Build familiarity. Then deepen the experience gradually. Deng Ji started with the most approachable dishes. Kung Pao chicken. Fish fragrant eggplant. These dishes carry a gentler spice level. They balance sour, sweet, and fragrant together. Taiwanese palates could meet them halfway. He used these dishes to open the door. Once Taiwanese diners were saying, actually this Sichuan food is not bad. He slowly introduced the more complex flavor profiles. Shuizhu Nyoro, the water-boiled beef. Fuchi Fipian, the husband and wife beef slices. The dishes that made your tongue genuinely go numb. This process took years. And during that time, he was simultaneously solving another enormous problem. The ingredient problem. Cross-strait trade was blocked. Many of Sichuan's most essential ingredients were simply unavailable. Take Pixian Dubanjiang for example. That is the sole condiment of Sichuan cooking. The particular fermentation aroma inside that bean paste is created by the specific climate and soil of Pixian County in Sichuan. It cannot be replicated anywhere else in the world. But in Taiwan, there was no Pixian Dubanjiang. What do? Deng Ji used Gangshan Dubanjiang from Taiwan instead. The flavor is different. But it was the closest available option. The same problem applied to Sichuan peppercorns. Hanyuan peppercorns, the finest grade from Sichuan, have a numbing quality that is bright and almost citrusy in character. The peppercorns available in Taiwan were not nearly as refined. But Deng Ji worked with what he had and brought the spirit as close as possible. And then there is a particularly interesting detail. The meat in mapo tofu. Authentic Sichuan mapo tofu always uses minced beef. The fat and aroma from beef creates something that pork simply cannot. But early Taiwanese farming culture had a deep-rooted reluctance to eat beef. Cattle were farming partners. And many Taiwanese people felt uncomfortable eating an animal that worked alongside their families. So Deng Ji switched the beef to pork in his mapo tofu. To veteran Sichuan chefs this felt like a compromise. But from a market perspective it was wisdom. Because the goal was to help Taiwanese people fall in love with Sichuan food. If one adjustment could bring more people through the door, that adjustment was worth making. This ability to adapt without losing the essential soul of the food is what made Deng Ji's contribution so lasting. Food writers would later say, what Deng Ji accomplished was a complete localization project for Sichuan cuisine in Taiwan. In essence it was a full experiment in the migration of flavor. And it succeeded. In doing so he laid the foundation for an entire culinary tradition to take root in a new land. That foundation, over the following decades, grew into something very large. By the 1970s, Sichuan cuisine in Taiwan had entered its golden era. Along Chengdu Road near Ximending, restaurant after restaurant opened. The Sichuan cuisine street was born. Qianyuan Sichuan Restaurant, Zhenchuan Wei, Fuhua Sichuan. These names rang out across Taipei, each of them operating for decades. Some still standing today. Eating Sichuan food in that era carried a particular feeling. You finished shopping or watching a movie at Ximending. You were hungry and you ducked into that lane. Found a seat. The table filled with bold Sichuan dishes. The fragrance heating the air around you. Everyone eating until sweat appeared on their foreheads. Chopsticks never stopping. That scene is one of the most vivid food memories carried by an entire generation of Taiwanese people. Now let me introduce our second protagonist. Han Tingting. Born in the late 1970s. She grew up at the edge of a Sichuan kitchen. The chefs of her grandfather's generation were like gods to her. She remembers the first time she watched the kitchen in full operation. Huge fire. Dense smoke. Iron wok. A master's hands moving through the light of the flames. The giant ladle swung into the wok. Flames leaping upward nearly 1 meter. That image stopped her completely. She said in that moment she knew one thing with perfect clarity. She said, "This is what I want." But entering the kitchen was not simple. The first day she formally worked in a professional kitchen. Her mentor did not ask her to cook. He handed her a pile of garlic. "Just peel it." She peeled garlic for 2 months. Then it was slicing ginger. Then washing and preparing vegetables. Then cutting and prepping ingredients. Each stage taking its time. There was no skipping ahead. There was no asking when you would be allowed to use the stove. Masters did not appreciate that kind of question. The philosophy of the old kitchen was this. What you observe is your teacher. The master's hands are your textbook. You record with your eyes. You feel with your hands. You judge with your tongue. Nobody needs to give you the answer. Go find the answer yourself. This training approach might seem slow by modern standards. But Han Tingting later said she was deeply grateful for those 2 months of peeling garlic. Because those 2 months taught her the most fundamental philosophy inside Sichuan cooking. 4 words. Good food does not rush. What does that mean in practice? Think about where the magic of Sichuan cuisine actually comes from. Pixian de Banjiang must ferment in ceramic jars for at least 1 full year. Often several years. Sichuan peppercorn oil must allow the peppercorns to bloom slowly in warm oil. Rush it and the result is bitter. A great Sichuan broth base requires pork bones and chicken carcasses simmering for 4 or 5 hours. Cut that short and the depth disappears. Every remarkable flavor in Sichuan cuisine exists inside patient waiting. Every remarkable flavor exists inside not rushing. Han Tingting carried that lesson her entire life. Then in the 1990s, the Taiwanese dining industry faced a major turning point. Cross-strait exchange opened up. Authentic Sichuan ingredients could finally enter. Pixian de Banjiang, Hanyuan peppercorns, green Sichuan peppercorn. Ingredients that had been substituted for decades could now be used in their genuine form. Han Tingting felt the moment had arrived. She said, "Now is the time to give Taiwanese people the real taste of Sichuan." But the challenge she faced was more complicated than what Deng Ji had navigated. Because by the 1990s in Taiwan, Cantonese cuisine had completely swept the dining market. Hong Kong-style dim sum was everywhere. Cantonese chefs brought with them a refined dining culture. Abalone, bird's nest and premium steamed seafood arriving at tables. The precision of Cantonese cooking technique had trained Taiwanese diners toward increasingly subtle and elegant flavors. And now you wanted to bring bold Sichuan cooking back into focus. Many people shook their heads. Too oily. Too spicy. Too rough. Han Tingting heard these words and did not get angry. She said, "You say too rough. Then I will make it more refined." But the soul of Sichuan food stays where it is. She began doing something that many traditionalist masters found difficult to accept. She started researching how to bring an elevated aesthetic to Sichuan cuisine. Plating first. Traditional Sichuan plating was bold and generous. A large serving placed on the table without much concern for visual arrangement. Delicious. But not beautiful. Han Tingting said. Our food can be beautiful too. She began studying how to slice fuchi fipian, the husband and wife beef slices, thin as paper. So thin the light nearly passed through. Arranged on the plate like an abstract composition. Drizzled with red chili oil. Scattered with sesame seeds and crushed peanuts. The layers of color reading almost like a painting. Then she changed the language of service. She said, "We need our guests to understand what they are eating. Not just that it tastes good, but why it tastes the way it does, what it means. She stepped out to face her guests. And she began telling them the stories behind the food. Take Kung Pao chicken. Most people assume it is simply spicy chicken with peanuts. But the name carries a history. Gong Bao was the honorific title of Ding Baozhen, a senior official of the Qing dynasty posted in Sichuan. He loved chili peppers and peanuts. His kitchen staff combined chicken with dried chilies and peanuts, balancing with vinegar and sugar to create a complex taste. Later generations named the dish after his title to honor him. Guests listening to this would look up from their plates and realize every dish carries a story. Eating is not just eating, it is tasting history made edible. This shift seemed modest, but its significance was enormous. Han Tingting transformed Sichuan cuisine from a culinary category into a cultural experience. People visiting her restaurant in that era were no longer just going for spice. They were going to enter a world of layered meaning, to feel the thousand textures beneath that numbing fire. Her name began circulating among Taipei's serious food circles. Veteran diners said, Han Tingting's Sichuan cooking has the deep roots of Deng Ji, but her own branches and leaves growing upward. That is the most moving thing about inheritance. The roots must not be cut, but the branches must grow. Let me pause here and share a story that stays with me. Han Tingting has a dish called Gan Gao Tang, liver custard soup. This dish had nearly disappeared completely. It is one of the highest expressions in the Nantang Sichuan banquet tradition. The preparation involves passing pork liver through a fine sieve into a liquid smooth as silk, combining it with stock and steaming it until it sets like very delicate tofu. When it arrives at the table, the soup is completely clear. Inside floats a piece of liver custard as tender as freshly made silken tofu. The texture is beyond description. Han Tingting said the first time she successfully created this dish, she tasted a spoonful herself and sat in silence for a long time. She said in that single taste, she could sense all the chefs who had come before her. She could feel the atmosphere of an entire era. Later, on one particular occasion, she served this dish to an elderly food lover at her table. He took one taste, and then stopped. He sat without speaking for a very long time, then finally spoke. He said, "My mother used to tell me, in Sichuan there is a dish called Gan Gao Tang. She said it was the most delicate thing she had ever eaten in her life. But she said she could never find it again after coming to Taiwan." And then the old man began to cry. He said, "What you just served me is exactly what my mother described. Every time I tell this story, something moves inside me. Because that was not just a bowl of soup. It was a connection spanning decades and thousands of kilometers. It was a story a mother once told her son. A memory from a world that could not be returned to, arriving back through one bowl of clear broth." This is the power of food culture. This is the deepest meaning of culinary inheritance. Now let me take a higher view and analyze what this phenomenon actually represents. Why do Deng Ji and Han Tingting together form a cultural phenomenon, rather than simply the story of two talented chefs? I see three distinct layers. The first layer. They represent the complete experiment of immigrant cuisine taking root in new soil. Think about the scale of what happened after 1949 in Taiwan. So many different regional cooking traditions arrived at once. How each of those traditions managed to survive. How they negotiated with local ingredients, local palates, local customs. That is one of the most fascinating questions in food history. Some culinary traditions disappeared entirely. Some transformed beyond recognition. Some found their rhythm and grew a new kind of life in Taiwan. Sichuan cuisine took that third path. Deng Ji's generation completed the first step, making Sichuan cuisine survive in Taiwan. Han Tingting's generation completed the second step, making Sichuan cuisine grow up in Taiwan, turning it into a permanent and essential part of the island's food identity. The second layer. They reveal both the profound value and the natural limits of the traditional apprenticeship system. The old kitchen apprenticeship model transmits knowledge at a density no book can replicate. The wordless teaching from hands to hands. The accumulated wisdom of years passed through demonstration and observation. These are irreplaceable. But the apprenticeship system also has a ceiling. Knowledge that stays secret. Too personal to scale. Too dependent on individual personalities to spread widely. Han Tingting's contribution was finding a bridge. Preserving what was irreplaceable in the old technique, while finding a contemporary language to express it outward. Making this beautiful tradition available to far more people. The third layer. They help us understand that truly enduring food culture does not survive on taste alone. It survives through the fusion of flavor memory and era memory and emotional connection. Why does a restaurant stay open for 60 or 70 years? Not only because the food is excellent, but because that space holds an accumulation of memories that no competitor can replicate. You go there and you are eating the memory of your father taking you there for the first time. You are eating the table where your closest friend celebrated a success with you. You are eating the fish-fragrant eggplant your grandmother always said was her favorite. These layers of feeling cannot be measured by deliciousness. This is the ultimate source of food culture's power. One more thing I want to share about Sichuan cuisine itself, because there is a widespread misunderstanding that I want to address. Most people believe Sichuan food is fundamentally about being spicy. But the truth is that Sichuan cuisine has 24 distinct flavor profiles. The most diverse flavor system of any culinary tradition in China. And of those 24 flavor profiles, only about 1/3 involve chili peppers at all. The other 2/3 of Sichuan cuisine is not spicy. There is tian xiao bai, a sweet dish pairing fatty pork with glutinous rice in a purely sweet preparation. Not a trace of spice. There is kai shui bai kai, the open water cabbage. A soup dish with completely clear broth. Inside rests a single piece of prepared Napa cabbage heart. It sounds humble, but that broth has been clarified using the proteins of chicken, pork, and duck. A technique of extraordinary complexity. The result is a flavor of such clean depth that people sit quietly after tasting it. No spice involved. The true soul of Sichuan cuisine is not spice. It is the numbing sensation from Sichuan peppercorn. Numbing and spicy are completely different experiences. Numbing comes from peppercorn. Spice comes from chili. They can work together. They can also work separately. Many people who taste authentic Sichuan peppercorn for the first time do not know how to describe it. A gentle numbness spreads across your lips. Then your tongue follows. But it is not pain. It is a subtle, tingling electricity, carrying a faint coolness. And inside that numbing sensation, the flavors of the dish unfold themselves slowly. This experience belongs exclusively to Sichuan cuisine. No other food tradition in the world creates anything quite like it. Deng Ji introduced Taiwanese people to this language. Han Tingting helped them fall in love with it, and helped them begin to claim it as part of their own identity. Today the Sichuan food landscape in Taiwan is remarkably diverse. The old-school Sichuan street restaurants around Ximending, still serving hui guo and song bao ji ding with bold, generous flavors. Refined Sichuan dining establishments presenting court-style Sichuan dishes with elegant finesse. Creative Sichuan chefs weaving Sichuan flavor elements into contemporary cooking. And Michelin-recognized Sichuan restaurants earning their place in the world of fine dining across Asia. All of this development stands on the foundation that earlier generations built. All of it was made possible by the bridging work that chefs like Han Tingting carried out across the decades. I want to close with one last thing. Someone once asked Han Tingting, "What is the soul of Sichuan cuisine?" She thought for a long time, then gave her answer. She said, "The soul of Sichuan cuisine is inclusion." Look at those 24 flavor profiles. Each one has a completely distinct personality. Mala is bold and dominating. Yuxiang is delicate and layered. Gongbao is agile and balanced. Guaiwei, the so-called strange flavor, contains sweet, salty, sour, spicy and numbing all at once. Tianxiang is gentle and warm. Can you say which of these is the true Sichuan food? All of them are. Every single one. This capacity for inclusion, this ability to find harmony within complexity, is the most extraordinary thing about Sichuan cuisine. And is it not exactly what Deng Ji and Han Tingting themselves demonstrated through their lives? Deng Ji included the Taiwanese palate, preserving the soul of his tradition while accepting the reality of a new place. Han Tingting included the demands of a new era, honoring the tradition while accepting the language of contemporary life. This inclusion, this generous openness to meeting the world where it stands, allowed Sichuan cuisine to take root in Taiwan, to grow into something the island now calls its own. A flavor that can travel across time, across the strait, across every kind of separation, and allow a steaming bowl of Sichuan food to become a memory shared by everyone who has ever loved it. This is the power of food culture. This is what inheritance truly means. Before I close today, I want to spend a few more moments on something that is easy to overlook. We have been talking about Deng Ji and Han Tingting as individual figures, but there is a bigger story running underneath their personal journeys. And that story is about how an entire culinary tradition negotiates with time. Every great cuisine in the world faces this challenge at some point. How do you preserve what is essential, while remaining alive and relevant? How do you honor the past without being trapped by it? How do you welcome the new without losing your identity? Sichuan cuisine in Taiwan faced this challenge in an especially concentrated way. Because it was not just navigating time. It was navigating geography, cultural difference, ingredient limitations, and shifting market trends all at once. What Deng Ji and Han Tingting modeled for us, in their different ways and different eras, was a kind of intelligent fidelity. Not rigid faithfulness that refuses all change, but a deep loyalty to the soul of something. That allowed the surface to flex and adapt as needed. This is harder than it sounds. It is easy to be rigid and call it authenticity. It is also easy to change everything and call it innovation. The genuinely difficult thing is to know what must stay, and what is allowed to move. Deng Ji knew that the essence of Sichuan cuisine was its layered flavor system. Its 24 distinct taste profiles. Its mastery of peppercorn and chili and fermented condiments. Those things could not change. But the specific ingredients used. The specific spice level delivered to a Taiwanese table. Those were surfaces that could move. Han Tingting knew that the essence of the craft was its depth of technique. The patience built into every slow-cooked broth. The judgment required to read oil temperature without a thermometer. The cumulative knowledge passed from hands to hands across generations. Those things could not change. But the presentation, the storytelling, the way of welcoming guests into the experience. Those were surfaces that could evolve. This distinction between soul and surface, between essence and expression, is one of the most important lessons that food culture teaches us. And it is a lesson that applies far beyond the kitchen. Any tradition worth preserving faces the same question. What is the thing that must not change? What is the thing that is actually free to transform? Getting that answer wrong in either direction has consequences. Hold too tightly to every surface detail, and you end up with a museum piece that nobody lives inside. Let go too quickly of essential things, and you end up with something that carries the name but has lost the meaning. Deng Ji and Han Tingting both got the balance right. In their own ways, in their own eras. That is why their story matters. Not just for food lovers, but for anyone thinking about how cultures survive and evolve. There is also something worth noting about the role of community in this story. Neither Deng Ji nor Han Tingting accomplished what they did in isolation. The old-school Sichuan restaurants around Ximending were not competing restaurants. They were a community. A community of people who carried similar memories and similar skills. Who kept each other honest about standards. Who created an ecosystem where Sichuan food culture could collectively thrive. The Sichuan cuisine street around Chengdu Road was not just a collection of restaurants. It was a support system. When ingredients were hard to find, people shared. When techniques were forgotten, people remembered together. When a dish was in danger of disappearing, someone in that community usually kept it alive. This is what community does for cultural traditions. It creates redundancy. It distributes the memory across many holders, so that no single loss can destroy the whole. Han Tingting understood this deeply. She spent years not just cooking, but connecting. With older chefs who held knowledge she had not yet encountered. With younger cooks who asked questions that made her rediscover things she had stopped noticing. With food writers and food lovers who helped her understand what the culture meant to people who were not inside the kitchen. She once said that the most important thing she ever did for her cooking was not any single technique she mastered. It was every conversation she had, every relationship she built, every bowl of food she shared with someone who then told her what it meant to them. Because in the end, that is what teaches you what to preserve. The people eating the food tell you what the food means. And what it means is what you are really trying to pass on. I also want to spend a moment on something that rarely gets discussed in food history. The role of the people who eat. We spend a great deal of time celebrating the chef, the visionary, the technician, the keeper of tradition. And that recognition is entirely deserved. But a culinary culture does not survive on chefs alone. It survives because there are people who keep coming back. People who bring their children. People who return for birthdays and anniversaries and ordinary Tuesday evenings when they simply need something that feels like home. The story of Sichuan cuisine in Taiwan is also the story of the Taiwanese diners who chose to open their minds and their palates to something unfamiliar. Who walked into that slightly intimidating smoke-filled alley for the first time, and decided to stay. That openness was not guaranteed. It had to be cultivated. It had to be invited. This is where the genius of Deng Ji comes into focus from a different angle. He was not only an excellent chef, he was an excellent communicator. He understood that between the kitchen and the guest, there is always a gap of unfamiliarity, a gap of cultural distance. And he made it his work to close that gap. One dish at a time. One diner at a time. Every Sichuan restaurant that survived in Taiwan for decades has hundreds of loyal regulars woven into its history. People who came so often that the staff knew their order before they sat down. Who brought their children and told them stories about coming to this same table as children themselves. Who became living threads in the fabric of a place. Their names are not recorded anywhere. But without them none of it would have lasted. This is the invisible foundation of food culture. The community of eaters who choose, year after year, to make a certain flavor part of their lives. Han Tingting understood this deeply. She spent years trying to understand not just how to cook Sichuan food, but how to make people feel that Sichuan food was genuinely theirs. Not a foreign import to be politely appreciated from a distance, but something that belonged to their own experience. Something they could tell their children about with the same warmth and ownership that Taiwanese people use when talking about beef noodle soup or pineapple cake. She wanted Sichuan cuisine to feel like part of what it means to grow up in Taiwan. Not just a chapter in a culinary history book, but a living presence in people's daily lives. Looking at Taiwan today, I think it is fair to say that this has happened. When young Taiwanese people argue passionately about which restaurant serves the best suan kaiyu. When families debate whether the mapo tofu at their neighborhood spot is better than the one grandmother used to order. When food lovers make pilgrimages to old Ximending restaurants that have been serving the same dishes for 60 years. You can see that Sichuan cuisine has been genuinely claimed. It has been woven into the fabric of what Taiwanese people eat and remember and love. That is the true measure of whether a culinary tradition has taken root. Not ratings or rankings, but whether ordinary people feel the food belongs to them. And by that measure, what Deng Ji began and Han Tingting continued, was a complete success. I want to take a little more time with something that I think deserves its own space in this conversation. The question of what it actually takes for a flavor to travel. Not just geographically, but across generations. When Deng Ji first began cooking Sichuan food in Taiwan, he was not thinking in grand historical terms. He was simply a chef trying to feed people. Trying to make a living. Trying to keep the tastes of his homeland alive in a new place. That is the level at which almost all cultural transmission begins. With ordinary people doing ordinary things. Making food, telling stories, teaching children, keeping practices alive. Not because they have calculated the historical significance of what they are doing, but simply because it matters to them right now, in this moment. The historical significance comes later, attached by people looking back. People like us, telling stories like this one. But in the moment itself, it is just someone standing in a kitchen at 6 in the morning. Checking whether the fermented bean paste is ready to use. Tasting a broth to judge whether it has enough depth. Deciding how much peppercorn is enough for today's customers. These small, repeated acts of attention and care, multiplied across thousands of mornings over decades, are what food culture is actually made of. Not heroic moments. Not single dramatic achievements. But the accumulation of ordinary mornings spent getting it right. Han Tingting once described her favorite moment in any day of cooking. It was not when a dish came out perfectly. It was not when a customer complimented her. It was the quiet hour before service started. When the kitchen was clean and ready. The stocks were simmering. The prep was done. And there was just a moment of stillness before everything began. She said in that moment, she could feel the presence of everyone who had stood in a kitchen before her. Her teachers. Their teachers. The long line of cooks stretching back through time. All of them had stood in a moment like this. All of them had done the prep. All of them had waited for the moment when food would connect people. That feeling, she said, is what makes the work meaningful. Not the individual dish. Not the individual compliment. But the sense of being part of a long, living line. Of carrying something forward that someone else carried before you. And that someone else will carry after you. This is, I think, the deepest thing that great culinary traditions teach us. That we are not the originators of what we do. We are the current custodians of something much older and larger than ourselves. And our job is simply to hold it with care. To pass it on a little better than we received it if we can. And to trust that someone after us will do the same. Deng Ji held it with care. Han Tingting held it with care. And because of them, the next generation of Taiwanese cooks who love Sichuan cuisine have something real to hold on to. Something that connects them. Not just to a set of recipes, but to a living tradition. To the long, unbroken human story of people feeding each other across time. That is a beautiful thing. And it all started with the fragrance of peppercorns in a little alley near Ximending. Let me also return briefly to the 24 flavor profiles. Because I want to make sure we truly appreciate what they represent. 24 distinct flavor combinations. Each internally consistent. Each with its own rules. Each capable of producing dishes that are recognizable but infinitely variable. The mala profile, the numbing and spicy combination, is probably what most people think of first when they hear Sichuan. And it deserves its reputation. When Sichuan peppercorn and chili meet in the right proportions, with the right aromatics, and are delivered to the right ingredient, the result is a sensory experience unlike anything else in world cuisine. Bold and overwhelming at first, then slowly opening into a complex landscape of flavor that keeps revealing new dimensions as you eat. But then consider the yuxiang profile, the fish fragrant flavor, which contains no fish whatsoever. The name comes from a combination of pickled chili paste, ginger, garlic, and scallion, originally developed to prepare fish, then discovered to work brilliantly with eggplant, pork, and countless other ingredients. A bright, savory, slightly sweet and tangy profile. Complex without being heavy. Accessible without being simple. Or consider guaiwei, the so-called strange flavor. This is Sichuan cuisine at its most audacious. Sweet, salty, sour, spicy and numbing are all present simultaneously. Not as competing elements, but in a state of dynamic, shifting balance, where each taste rises and recedes in turn, creating a continuous experience of surprise and satisfaction. A culinary tradition that holds 24 such distinctive profiles within a single coherent system is not merely a collection of recipes. It is a sophisticated language, one that took centuries to develop, and requires decades to truly understand. When Deng Ji carried this system to Taiwan, he was not just bringing food. He was bringing an entire philosophical approach to flavor, a way of understanding the relationship between ingredients, technique, and taste that is as deep and nuanced as any artistic or intellectual tradition. And when Han Tingting worked to communicate that philosophy to a new generation, she was doing something genuinely important. She was ensuring that this richness would not be simplified into something easier to explain but lesser in meaning, that the 24 would remain 24. This matters because the depth of a culinary tradition is exactly what makes it worth preserving. A simplified version might be easier to describe, but a simplified version cannot create the same memories, cannot spark the same moments of recognition, cannot produce the experience of an old man tasting a soup and suddenly finding something he thought was lost forever. That moment of finding is only possible if the full richness has been maintained, not a simplified echo, but the genuine thing, the deep thing, the thing that carries the weight of all those patient mornings in the kitchen. This is what Deng Ji protected. This is what Han Tingting continued protecting. And this is what, at its very best, the story of Sichuan cuisine in Taiwan is truly about. Let me bring everything together now with one final image. Imagine a kitchen, late at night, after the restaurant has closed and the last guests have gone home. The fire is lower now. The smoke has cleared a little, but the fragrance of the evening is still in the air. Sichuan peppercorn, fermented bean paste, scorched chili, rendered fat. A young cook is cleaning the wok, and she is thinking about a soup she tasted tonight. A soup that tasted exactly like something an old man once told her his mother described. A soup that connected a living person to a memory he had carried for 50 years without knowing it could still be found. She is thinking about that moment. And she is deciding something. She is deciding that this is worth protecting. This ability to reach across time through a bowl of food. This ability to make someone feel that what they thought was gone is not completely gone. This is worth every slow hour of preparation. Every patient year of learning. Every conversation with every older chef willing to share what they remembered. This is what Deng Ji built. This is what Han Tingting carried forward. This is what Sichuan cuisine in Taiwan, at its best, has always been about. A flavor that can travel across time, across the strait, across every kind of separation, and allow a steaming bowl of Sichuan food to become a memory shared by everyone who has ever loved it. This is the power of food culture. This is what inheritance truly means. I'm Jenny. Thank you for spending this time with me today. See you next time.